Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, my name appears on this petition as I spent many years campaigning for the EU to agree to negotiate the Marrakesh Treaty so that blind people could get books in formats that they can read. That campaign succeeded in June 2013 with the treaty's conclusion. But blind and partially sighted people still cannot benefit from the treaty as, shamefully, 26 months after the treaty was concluded, a blocking minority of EU member states will still not agree to its ratification. Among others, India has ratified the treaty, Argentina has ratified, Mexico has ratified. Why not the EU? You'll hear from the Presidency about a keenness to ratify, but that there are tricky technical discussions on this matter. In reality, though, the non-ratification of a treaty which simply allows blind people to access books is a failure of political will. I urge the committee to support the European Blind Union's campaign for a clear and short timetable to EU ratification. I urge the Member States to stop hiding behind ever-changing technical and legal excuses and to agree to such a timetable. I urge some compassion and some fellow feeling from those Member States. Specifically, I ask the Petitions Committee to write a letter to the Council urging EU ratification without having to wait for ECJ rulings and for new legislation, which are both unnecessary according to both the Council and the Commission's legal services and all independent opinion. Perhaps the committee would be minded to send a resolution to the plenary urging immediate ratification. Such a measure was very successful when we were campaigning for the treaty to be concluded. At its best, the EU has been a strong advocate of human rights. Now it is time for it to find the political will to support the rights of blind people, rights which, as we've been hearing, it is legally bound to uphold through the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That's all I want to say as a petitioner, but I will pass the floor to my colleague Wolfgang Angermann, who is the president of the of the European Blind Union. Thank you.
Meine Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, according to estimates of the World Blind Union and the European Blind Union, only 5% of books in the industrialized countries are available in Braille, for the blind, in larger print or as an audio form or accessible digital form. If we look at developing countries, these figures are closer to 1%. Internationally, this is called book famine. And in Europe alone, this affects the training, working life and cultural participation of 30 million blind people. What we have to do is combat this situation effectively. On the 30th of April 2014, the European Union signed the Marrakesh Treaty of the 27th of June 2013 to improve the access to public works for blind, visually impaired and other people with reading difficulties. This was another small step on the long way to improve worldwide access to literature. All of those who for years were waiting for this important treaty had hoped that this treaty would also be ratified by the European Union. This hope has not yet been fulfilled. Instead of that, we see an ongoing dispute between the Commission and the Council over issues of competence. There is a clear no from some EU member states, and much to my disappointment, that includes Germany. And it seems as if nobody of those who are fighting with one another are ready to really look at the goal of this treaty. What we're talking about here is nothing less than guaranteeing a human right, the right to information. Information is the basis of all decisions throughout our lives. There is no question that this lack of information is a great disadvantage with regard to the quality of life. Literature, no matter what form it is made available in, contains information which has a major impact on our social, our professional and our cultural participation in society. Access to this information and participation cannot just fail because it's only available to some people, because it's not available in accordance to the needs of others. This is the idea behind the Marrakesh Treaty, and that is what we want people to recognise, people who are still standing in the way of ratification of this treaty. If I, as a German, want to learn Spanish, then I've got to find a book in Spain available in Braille, and I must buy it or borrow it. A blind student in Sweden who wants to study economics must have the possibility of finding available literature in the English language, in English-speaking countries, and having that in Braille or whatever form is needed. The necessary rules with regard to import and export are contained in the Marrakesh Treaty, but not, however, the special rules with regard to copyright in the EU member states. Article 21 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability calls for access to information with the same conditions and without additional costs. As we all know, the European Union is a party to this United Nations Convention. Ladies and gentlemen, please help us here, freeing up this way so that this Marrakesh Treaty can finally pull down these barriers which are blocking the way of many millions of people in Europe and around the world, and preventing them from having their human right to information in the area of literature. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to support what's just been said and what Beatrice said in the last petition debate. I think the idea of limiting people's professional and personal development because of a turf war over competence between European institutions is not only totally irresponsible, but it's really totally unacceptable. And I think we should send an extremely strong message from the committee, not only keeping the petition open, but sending a message to both institutions that there has to be a rapid resolution to that conflict. It seems to me that the problem, one of the big problems that we have, is a question of political will, and a question of getting governments to realise how important this is for ordinary people. And I'm the granddaughter of a woman in her 90s with macular degeneration, and talking books and books from the societies, the Macular Society, are a key lifeline for my grandma. It's a key way of keeping in life, keeping in, feeling a social presence, feeling part of, culturally aware and informed. And I think it's that lifeline which is really important, and we should have that at the forefront of our minds. So I'm absolutely ashamed that my government is part of the blocking minority in the European Council. I think they should be ashamed as well that they're not allowing, for example, the Indian diaspora in the UK to take advantage of the fact that there are texts available in India which could be sent overseas to allow people to learn and to enjoy. And I think it's particularly poignant because today in the Scottish Parliament, as we're meeting here in the European Parliament, the Scottish Parliament are talking about what they can do practically to improve the situation for blind and partially sighted people by recognising British Sign Language and extending practical action, and that's led by a Labour member of the Scottish Parliament, Mark Griffin. And I think it shows the very different nature of our government from lots of people who would like to see a more progressive agenda for the UK in terms of the rights of people with disabilities. So I think we have to send an extremely strong signal from this committee, and I subscribe to all of the comments which were made before me.